Welcome to our sound desk training. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video and grow in your skills. In this video, you will get a great basic overview of our Midas M32 digital sound desk, which will be a great way for you to familiarize yourself with the desk as you continue to grow in your skills and talents and serve the Lord in our worship ministry.
Okay, so I think the first thing to say in terms of this disc, for those who've worked with the Behringer X32 before, this is exactly the same software, and it's very similar in terms of workflow. So I have no doubt that after the next few minutes, for those who've worked on the X32, you'll be very comfortable with the workflow and how this desk operates. But if we kind of start at the start in terms of or maybe just a couple of things first before we get into how we call something up. I just want to go through the general workflow of the desk, and then we can start pressing buttons and things like that. A couple of things that are different between this and the X32 is that the Midas has no talkback mic built into it, okay? So that's why we've got the little external microphone there. We might need to just get like a 1 meter long cable with the spare mic if we're able to. And then you plug that in there, and then you use that as your talkback mic, whereas the X32 had the little built-in microphone that you could kind of go close to and talk to the bands through that. Yeah, so that's the one difference there. And then, obviously you can see that the format, just in terms of the desk, you've got your channel strips over here, or your fader strips here, and then you've got the whole channel strip up here, and it's more angled and whatnot like that. In terms of the software is exactly the same as the X32, okay? And the major difference with this particular desk is simply the hardware is much better quality. When you turn a particular knob or encoder, or you move a fader up and down, you can feel that this thing was built to last, and it's rated for, I think these faders are rated for 1 million moves, whereas the Behringer faders were rated for 300,000 moves. So, in theory, it should last 3 times as long from that perspective. Okay, so just a quick summary in terms of how the desk is laid out. Mel, to your point, obviously, for folks who've worked on old analog desks as well, typically what you had is you had your individual fader here, and then you had a whole set of buttons up there, and every single channel had its own input gain, it had its own EQ strip, and it had, if there were effect sends or monitor levels or what, it was all in one little strip. So that's the big difference between the digital desks like this and the analog desks, is that with the digital desks now, typically what you have is you have your entire fader groups here, and then you have what's called the channel strip, which is this area up here. So the channel strip consists of everything that and more that was in that on the old analog desks on the single line. But the difference here is when you want to select when you want to edit something, if you want to change an EQ or you want to do select input gain, you have to first select the channel. So if I do if I've got channel 1 over here, there's nothing happening on channel 1, but I press select, you'll see that it goes blue like that, so that means that particular channel is selected. And then this entire bank that you see over here is now active and working on channel 1. If I were to select channel 8, now all of a sudden this entire thing over here is now working on channel 8. So for the folks who've worked on the digital desk before, this is a well-known concept, but it's probably one of the big differences just in terms of workflow and how you tend to do it. And the biggest mistake that folks have when they move on to a digital desk, when they're not used to it, is they will select something and they'll work on it, and then they'll go, oh, there's another channel where I need to edit something, and they'll forget to select that other channel, and they'll start to edit parameters again, and then they're basically messing up the channel that they just had selected previously. So understanding where the little blue light is on the select is really important in terms of knowing where you are, and this is exactly the same as the X32. Okay, so if we have a look at the desk, you've got your faders over here, you've got 2 banks of 8 faders here, which bring volumes up and down. And then we've got a couple of layers. So this is a 32 channel desk. You have 16 channels, on the first layer here, and if you press input 617 through 32, that drops you down to the second bank of 16 channels, 17 through 32. We're not going to get to these ones today. I think we'll leave those. But for the most part, most of the mixing on a Sunday is happening on these two channels. We typically have the preacher and the host mics on the second layer, and then the bands, all the bands channels are on the first layer over there. If you move over to the right here, this is called the bus section. Okay, so this is a little different. What happens here is this is where we have various groupings. So these faders will typically feed into various groupings here on this side. What the first layer is called a DCA group, which is a digitally controlled amplifier group. So basically what happens here is once we've set up our mix over here and we've got it all sounding nice, all the vocals in balance with each other, all the instruments in balance with each other, they then feed to, all the vocals feed through to this particular fader, all the instruments feed through to this particular fader, drums and the communicators and all the music and the media, so that if you want to drop the vocals or boost all the instruments or bring all the drums down, you don't have to go and press all, you don't have to bring all of these down like this and get all these settings messed up in terms of your relative levels. You can just use one fader and you bring all the vocals down or all the instruments down or all the music and media down. And so that's a very helpful function when you need to make some sort of, let's say, global level changes to a group of instruments or vocals or things like that. So that's the DCA strip on this here. The next one down is what we call buses 1 through 8. And a bus, again, it's kind of like, if you think about a bus, it's just a whole bunch of channels all being put together, going off to a particular destination. So that's the bus. And buses 1 through 8 is where all of our monitors are. So this is for our musicians to hear on stage, and that is exactly the same as it was on the X32. We'll get to exactly how we mix those later on. Buses 9 through 16, this is where we have our effects, so our reverbs and our delays are these purple ones, buses 13 through 16. That's making all the vocals and everything sound a bit pretty. It's always nice to add some effects to those, and we use that. And then buses 9 through 12, or buses 9 and 10 and 11 and 12, these are combining all of the vocals, including the preacher and the hosts, and all of the instruments, including media. And we use this to essentially send out to our streaming mix. And then the final layer, which I'm not going to get too much into right now, is what we call matrix mix. And this is where essentially all of the audio gets fed through from those individual channels to those buses that I was mentioning on the previous layer over here. It gets fed through to these matrices, and these matrices then push out to the stream, to the cry room, to the back hall, and then obviously we've got some of these delay fills over here that just help to fill in the sound at the back, and those go over here. So we kind of just leave those as they are. They've been set up, and that's where they are. Moving just further to the right, obviously we have the main, and there we go, you can hear it. We have the main fader. So that brings house volume, up and down for the rest of the mix. Okay, so that is essentially the fader groups, the bus section, and the main mix at that point. Okay, so we've spoken about the fader strips now. We've spoken about the various levels that we have. We've spoken about the bus sections and the main faders, so that's all great. So if we just then track back up to the channel strip, when we are wanting to edit a particular channel or do something to that, we would then, as I said, select that particular channel, and then this whole channel strip over here now becomes active for that particular channel. And typically the way that the signal goes, if I can say, is that the signal comes in here from the stage. It comes into this config preamp section first, and this is where we first set the input volume. So when we want to set input volume, typically what we do is we press solo onto the channel, and then we will look at the input volume coming in, and you can see at this point, oh wait, because I am soloed there. Okay, I'm just going to go to this channel because we're actually working on it now. you will see over here that there's nothing happening over here. As soon as you press solo, all of a sudden you see the input volume coming at that point. And then what we would do is we'd use the gain encoder over here to set the appropriate input gain. And this is really the foundation of any mix, is to get a nice strong input signal. Otherwise, you're basically just fighting a losing battle at this point. So the rule of thumb is that the input at sort of a regular volume, if the person is singing or if the person is talking like I am here, this input volume should be peaking just around about, let me see, I need to press select first of all. As you can see, so I'll press select. And this input volume should be peaking just around about that those first two ambers, so -18 to -15. That's the sweet spot. So if I went here loud, you can see there we go, it gets up there. That gives enough strength that it's going to allow the rest of the processing to have good, strong input signal to do its job. But it also gives you enough headroom that if someone gets very loud very quickly like that, it doesn't clip. As soon as you get up to that point and you get up to clip, the little preamplifier that is converting the sound from at the stage then is overloaded and it'll start to distort, and you'll hear this horrible digital distortion coming through. So you never want that, and -18 to -15 is the magic number there. So if we just talk again about the preamp section, that's where you would set your input volume. If the particular microphone is a condenser microphone, you would then want to add phantom power. We don't need to worry about polarity at that point. That basically just reverses the current on the microphone. If you are doing fairly complex miking of acoustic of real drums and things like that, sometimes you need to flip the polarity because of phasing issues. And then this is a low cut. So this is essentially for many of our vocals and many instruments, we don't want the low frequencies, and so we don't need all that boominess in a vocal, for example. So we use a low cut to essentially remove the low end frequencies, and where you place that low cut is subject to taste and the type of instrument that you're going to use. From there, the unit then goes through a gate function, or the signal then passes to the gate section. And the gate section is really just where sometimes we want the microphone to essentially, it's a gate. It allows, once the volume gets to a certain point, it'll open up and it'll allow the audio through and you'll hear it. And if the volume drops below a certain level in the gate, then it'll close and you won't hear anything. And that's helpful on vocal microphones on stage if there's a lot of stage noise and you don't want all of that stage noise bleeding through when the singer isn't singing. You set the gate so that the microphone basically shuts down when they're not singing, and when they start to sing, it opens up and it's heard. And then the dynamics section over here, so I'll just show you here as this is the gate section, and you can select, you can see there's a little view button here under each section. So when you're working on a particular section, you can just press view, and then on the screen you will have that particular function there with all of the various parameters. We're not going to get into what the parameters do tonight. And then again, dynamics is essentially compression, so that's the next thing in the signal chain. There is a way to change the order of these things as well, but I've always just left them the way that the desk was set up. It works fine. And again, compression, not going to get into exactly what that does, but we all know for those who know compression, it's really about taming the very loud sounds and making them a bit softer, and bumping up the soft sounds and making them a bit louder so that you have a more consistent signal in the mix, and people will perceive that as an improvement in clarity to a particular sound source or vocal or something like that. So that's the next thing in the signal chain, is compression. And you can see that the compressor is, this little dot is moving up and down as I'm talking, indicating just how much input signal it is getting, and if we were to start using it, we would see how it attenuates the signal and does what it needs to do. Next in the chain is the equalization section, and again, very similar to the X32, and the equalization section has exactly the same. It's a 4-band EQ, low, low, mid, and high, with controls for the width of the frequency or Q, the frequency that you're trying to, the band filter to select which frequency you want to edit, and then the gain in terms of whether you want to make it louder or softer. So just to show on the desk here, we're using the low mid function. We can increase the gain like that, and you can see it'll be increasing those particular frequencies. And when I speak about the width, you can see that when I make the width very narrow, it's only going to be boosting a very specific frequency. And if I make it very wide, it's going to be boosting a whole bunch of frequencies. My recommendation as well, just from an EQ perspective, is boost wide. Your ears, when you're boosting a frequency, your ears like it to be a more gradual boost. But if you need to cut like that, then try and cut as narrow as possible. Sometimes you do need to widen out a cut to deal with a range of frequencies, but the narrower you can get your cut, the better. Your ears don't mind having a narrow band of frequencies cut very drastically. They kind of fill in around it, but they don't like having they don't like having a boost of frequencies like that around a very narrow thing. Then your ear will view that or hear that and interpret that as being very unnatural. So boost wide and cut narrow. That's kind of the rule of thumb there. Okay, so that's the equalization section. And then that's basically kind of the meat and potatoes of most of what we do on a Sunday in terms of equalization. And then we get into the bus sends, and I'm not going to worry about these too much. Really, the bus sends are where we can select a channel and we can send it either to our monitors, or we can send it to these vocal buses here, or we can send it to our effects. And we just select which, this bus 1 through 4 is correlating with these guys here, buses 5 through 8 there, 9 through 12, 9 through 12, and then 13 through 16 is the effect. So typically on a Sunday, I find that, and you can also view it here in terms of, this just gives you a little output of where things are being sent to. So you can see I've selected this particular channel, I've selected buses 13 through 16, and if I were to, so encoder 1 will correlate to 13, encoder 2 to 14, 3 to 15, 4 to 16. Sometimes the math gets people a bit confused around that, but the 4 coders will basically link to whichever 4 buses you have selected. So these ones here, and you can see here as I bring up encoder 1, you can see that bus 13 is starting to raise there, and you can also see it starting to peak over there as well. And as I drop it, it goes down there. So those are the bus send sections. And again, in future time, we'll spend more time around effects and how to mix that appropriately and everything like that. Then we just have the main bus. So sometimes people get confused because they select something and they bring it up in the mix and they can't hear it. And all the DCAs are unmuted and everything's good. But if this main stereo has not been selected, then it is not routing that particular channel through to the main mix. So I'll just do that. I'm going to bring this up here. You can hear it here. As soon as I do this and I take it away, it's gone. Okay, because all of a sudden this channel is going through all the processing, but it's getting to this final section and it's not being told where to go. And so you have to select main stereo here, and hey, we're back. Let's bring that down again. And then we have balance and pan. So this is essentially whether we're going to pan it hard right or hard left. And that has more of an impact when we're dealing with a stereo type of instrument like the piano, which has a right and a left, and you want to hear that. You'll also see that some of the instruments do have this mono center selected as well. So mono center is sending all of the audio to our subs. And the only thing that we typically send to our subs is the drums there, the piano, because sometimes the piano does have a nice big low end that we want it to have, and the bass guitar. I think everything else you will see is not being routed to that mono-centered channel, so nothing else is going to the subs. The only signal that is being sent to the subs is drums, piano, bass guitar, and then obviously our music channels, our media channels, where you want to have the full frequency going through for low end and stuff like that.
And also the tuner when we use the synth as well.
Yeah. So the keyboards, synths, anything where you want to have loops as well. I don't know. Yeah, loops as well, because sometimes loops will have like a low end thump or whatever you want. So that's all sent there. But this is just a kind of a safe way. So if you were mixing and you did want to bring something into the subs for whatever reason, you would just select this, and it would be routed to the subs. Although I would caution against it. I think kind of what is being sent to the subs is what needs to be sent, and everything else is just going to the tops. And that will prevent us from having too much low-end boominess in the room. Okay, let's just get back here. Okay, so that's the main bus section, and then finally we have the screen section here, which depending on what you're selecting to view over here on the different sections will show you something different over here. So I forgot to say on the right-hand side, you've got the monitor and the phones level. So this is just for your headphones. This is pretty much the only thing you'll be using here. And then you've got your TalkBack microphone over here. And what's nice is you've got Talk A and Talk B. What I like to have set up is Talk A is push to talk, so you press this and it sends signal through and you can speak to the band. And then Talk B I set as a latch unlatch, so I can press it and then it's on if I'm doing something, and then I can press it and it goes off again. I wouldn't use that in the service because you don't want, it's pretty sensitive, and the musos with in-ears particularly will hear it very clearly if the mix coming through the microphone back through the talk back to them. But if you're trying to figure something out and you just need to have your hands free, then not having to press TalkBack A as the whole time. So we can set that, and we'll do that later. Okay, so let's move on then just to kind of the last few little areas here. Obviously, show control. This is where we recall our scenes. So Mel, we'll get to this at the end, just in terms of how you recall a scene. We don't, yeah. And then this area over here is what we call our assign section. So this is like a very flexible, you can set this up to basically control pretty much any parameter on the desk that you want, the way you want it. And you've got 3 different layers that you can do it. So you've got an A, a B, and a C. So it means that you've got, all of these controls times 3. You can set parameters for that. Typically what we've got, the way we've got the desk set up is that the encoders here are speaking primarily to certain parameters on the reverbs and the delays that we use over here. Pre-delay, which people shouldn't really have to worry about. Decay, which is really just how long the delay will carry on for. I can show you very quickly here. Just let me do this. Here we go. Bring that up. 1, 1. Okay, you can hear that. And then if I turn the decay up, 1. So that's a very long decay. And that's a very short decay. And it's getting feedback now, so I'm going to drop that down. Anyway, so decay is basically how long the reverb will carry on for, how big of a room are you in, as it were. But it's a time-based parameter, and we do need to change it. You should be changing it depending on the tempo of the song. And then we've got delay settings, which are related to these 2 parameters here, where basically you can tap in the time for the song. Delay is a time-based effect, so you always need to have it in tempo with the song, otherwise it will sound out. And then these bottom encoders here are to essentially mute these effects here. So particularly when the worship leader is talking during the middle of a song, you don't want to have those big delays and reverbs on the vocal, because it'll sound a bit weird if they're trying to pray and there's all of these effects happening on it. But quite often you're not on this layer, you're somewhere else and whatnot, and it's very nice just to have these that you know that you can press them and you know that the effects are muted. And then here's mute groups, and we haven't set these up actually, but you can also set this up so that by pressing one of these buttons, it will mute a pre-selected group of channels, and that's helpful if you, at the end of the session, you want to just mute the band but keep the host mics on or something like that. You just press one button and the whole band gets muted and those kinds of things. And you can set this up however you want to. Yeah, so let's have a look here. So yeah, so that's band. You can see as I press there. Yeah, and then let's just see if 2 is. There was the effects area here. This is an assignable section. You can assign this to anything you want. We've assigned it to various effects, and then the mute groups over here will mute or unmute a pre-selected group of channels, however you want that. Okay, the final thing just to show on the desk is on the screen itself. We've got on the right-hand side, you've got various buttons here, and this will correspond to a couple of things. There's a home section. So home is quite nice if you just want to select one channel and you want to see literally everything about that channel. What the input volumes are, what the EQ is, dynamics. It's kind of the snapshot of everything for that channel, and you can see that on home. Meters is another good one, where you can have a broad view of all the meters on the input gains of the desk, and you can see if anything's clipping. So it's a nice way just to check that you are, if you're having any problems with that. It shows a bunch of other things around gates and gain reduction for compression, but don't worry about that. Routing, we should never have to change. That is kind of a global set and forget. You don't need to deal with that, as is setup at this point. We don't need to do anything there. Library is where you can load different presets and things like that as well. Typically don't use it because I find it's better just to work from a blank canvas and build your own ones. And then the final one is the effect. So this is, in the olden days, you had, with the old analog discs, you'd have your mixer here, and then you'd have a rack next to it with all of the effects and your compressors and your delays and everything, and then you'd have to route it out with the cables to the effects unit and bring it back into the desk. And the wonderful world of digital these days, all of that is now sitting virtually inside the desk, and we've got this set up for the various types of reverbs and effects that we use, and a bunch of additional compression that we use on certain instruments. So that's all here. Mute groups, I think it's just around how you can also use this to mute or unmute a group from in this section if you don't want to do it here, and we take that off. And then utility is again, I think just looking at various presets and so forth like that you can load in. But again, it's not something that most people will have to look into. So yeah, I think that's a very quick whirlwind trip through the desk. It looks scarier than it is. And the big thing I would say is just not to be flustered, to be methodical. And if you are confused about something, it's always just a matter of going, okay, really, which channel have I selected? And that's kind of where you start and you move through from that. So a lot of the stuff, the desk can be as simple as we want to make it, and Mel, for the preset we'll make for sort of the midweek things, we'll make it very simple, just a select, unmute, and you're good to go. And the desk can be as complex as the sound guys for Sunday mornings want to make it as well. And that, I think, is everything about the desk in terms of a broad overview. Cool.